Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Thursday, May 1st, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside today looks quite pleasant, with a high expected to reach 74.8 degrees and a low tonight dipping down to around 56 degrees. Coming up on the show, we'll investigate how specific trade policies might have played a role in triggering an economic contraction, looking at the data and potential consequences. Then, we shift focus to California, where Democrats are finding themselves divided over the best approaches to housing policy. We'll explore the reasons behind this fracture and what it could signal for the state's efforts to address affordability and availability. All this and more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. We begin this morning with some concerning news on the economic front, indicating the U.S. economy hit a significant speed bump in the first quarter of this year. For more on what these numbers mean, we're joined by our news reporter, Ethan. Ethan, the headline figure sounds pretty stark.
It's certainly caught everyone's attention, Grace. Reports released yesterday confirmed that the U.S. gross domestic product, or GDP, actually shrank in the first 3 months of 2025. According to reporting from outlets like the Los Angeles Times and PBS NewsHour, the economy contracted at an annualized rate of 0.3%. That's the first quarterly decline we've seen in 3 years, and as the LA Times pointed out, the economy's weakest performance since early 2022.
A contraction after years of growth. What drove this downturn? Was consumer spending down significantly?
That's the complex part. While consumer spending did slow down, dropping to a 1.8% annual growth rate from 4% the previous quarter, according to the Los Angeles Times, it wasn't the main culprit. The primary driver, identified by both PBS NewsHour and the LA Times, was a massive surge in imports directly linked to President Trump's trade policies and the anticipation of tariffs. Businesses essentially rushed to bring in foreign goods before those tariffs kicked in fully on April 2nd.
So businesses importing more goods actually made the overall economy look smaller? How does that work?
Exactly. It seems counterintuitive, but GDP calculation subtracts imports because they represent goods produced elsewhere. The Los Angeles Times reported this import surge was huge, growing at a 41% annualized pace, the fastest since 2020. Paul Wiseman's reporting for the LA Times highlighted that this import flood alone effectively sliced a hefty 5 percentage points off the growth figure. Analysis shared via Perplexity API suggests this wasn't about weak demand here at home, but rather businesses strategically stockpiling to avoid higher costs later. It was less about a lack of buying and more about the timing of buying from abroad.
Okay, so the headline number was heavily skewed by imports. Does that mean the underlying domestic economy is actually doing okay?
There are definitely signs pointing that way, which makes this report a bit of a puzzle. Despite the overall contraction and slower consumer spending, the Los Angeles Times highlighted a really substantial jump in business investment, reportedly surging by 21.9% in the quarter. Furthermore, a key measure economists watch called Real Final Sales to Private Domestic Purchasers, which basically tracks spending by consumers and businesses here, grew at a healthy 3% annual rate. Perplexity API, citing an Axios report, noted this was actually an acceleration from the 2.9% growth in the fourth quarter of 2024, suggesting some solid underlying momentum.
A 21.9% surge in business investment is massive. Do we know what kind of investments those were?
That figure is certainly an eye-opener, and analysis from Perplexity API suggests several factors might be contributing, though we need more detailed official data. Likely drivers include significant investment in artificial intelligence and related technology, a rebound in the energy sector boosting spending on equipment, and possibly companies investing in domestic supply chains, sometimes called onshoring, partly due to those same tariff policies. Stable financing conditions early in the year probably helped support these projects too. However, it's worth noting this surge far exceeds forecasts, like Deloitte's projection of 3.4% growth for the year.
How did Wall Street react to this mixed bag of economic news?
Not surprisingly, the initial reaction was negative. PBS NewsHour, ABC News, and the Los Angeles Times all reported that U.S. stock markets declined following the GDP report yesterday. The Dow Jones, S&P 500, and NASDAQ all took a hit as investors processed the contraction.
Looking ahead, Ethan, what are the concerns? Does this Q1 dip signal a recession is coming?
That's the big question. Economists cited by PBS NewsHour and the Los Angeles Times are worried that the ongoing uncertainty around trade policy, with tariffs acting like taxes as they put it, will continue to weigh on growth and could increase recession risks this year. ABC News noted concerns that inflation, while cooler in March, might rise again due to these tariffs. This puts the Federal Reserve in a tricky spot, as PBS highlighted, potentially having to choose between cutting rates to support growth or keeping them higher to fight inflation, especially with a key inflation gauge ticking up. Adding to worries, PBS also mentioned an ADP report suggesting weaker than expected private job growth in April.
And politically, how is this playing out?
Predictably, there's finger-pointing. According to PBS NewsHour, Democrats are blaming President Trump's trade policies. President Trump, as reported by ABC News, deflected blame onto the previous administration and defended his tariff strategy, although ABC also noted he did sign orders to relax some tariffs on autos after industry concerns were raised. It seems these tariffs are proving quite taxing in more ways than one.
Is there any expectation that things might turn around in the current quarter?
There is some optimism, believe it or not. According to Perplexity API, citing analysts covered by CBS News, the consensus forecast is for a rebound in this second quarter, projecting about 2.0% annualized GDP growth. The thinking is that the huge import surge that dragged down Q1 will reverse. The resilience we saw in domestic demand supports this view. However, there's caution too. FS Investments, mentioned via Perplexity API, suggests even that forecast might be optimistic given the policy uncertainty. The overarching concern, echoed across reports from PBS and the LA Times, remains that persistent tariffs could eventually put a tighter grip on the economy.
A complex picture indeed. Ethan, thank you for breaking down those numbers for us.
You're welcome, Grace.
We're turning now to Sacramento, where it seems the foundation of the Democratic Party might have a few cracks when it comes to building California's future, specifically its housing. Joining us to discuss this is our news reporter, Chloe. Chloe, reports suggest something quite unusual happened in the legislature recently.
That's right, Grace. According to reporting from CalMatters, synthesized with analysis from Perplexity API, there was a very rare event around April 30th. In two separate instances, members of key housing committees actually voted to overrule their own Democratic committee chairs during policy votes. This is seen as highly significant, maybe even unprecedented, and it really throws a spotlight on some deep disagreements within the party.
Overruling the chair? Not once, but twice? That sounds like more than just a minor disagreement. What's the fault line here? What are they clashing over?
It boils down to differing philosophies on how to tackle the state's housing crisis. Perplexity API's analysis points to a split. On one side, you have progressive advocates pushing for bold state action. They want things like significantly increased housing density, especially near public transit, stronger protections for renters including expanded rent control, and mandatory affordability requirements. They believe the state needs to step in and sometimes override local zoning rules to get housing built.
So state power versus local power?
Exactly. The other side emphasizes local control. These members, perhaps more centrist or focused on their specific districts, are wary of state mandates that bypass city and county decisions. They question focusing too heavily on market rate housing or specific developer incentives, preferring solutions tailored by the communities themselves. ETA's a real tug-of-war over who gets to lay the blueprint for new housing.
Do we know which specific bills caused these fireworks, these overrulings?
The reports available as of today, May 1st, don't name the exact bills involved in those specific votes where the chairs were overruled. However, Perplexity API notes that recent debates give us context. For example, bills like Senator Scott Wiener's SB 79, which aimed to force cities to allow denser housing near transit, faced pushback from committee chair Senator Aisha Wahab, who argued for local control. SB 79 reportedly passed committee despite that friction. Another bill, SB 677, also likely related to building near transit, drew criticism for potentially prioritizing market rate units over affordable ones and overriding local zoning. These earlier fights definitely set the stage.
It sounds like they're really trying to build consensus, but hitting some structural issues. What's the bigger picture here? This isn't happening in a vacuum.
Definitely not. CalMatters has done extensive reporting on the immense pressure. California desperately needs more housing, and it needs to be affordable. A legislative report back in March stressed needing a huge increase in construction, yet challenges pile up. A state fund for student housing ran out of money in February, impacting community colleges. CalMatters also reported in February that despite promises, the Democrats' overall affordability plan wasn't crystal clear, and efforts to help the unhoused are struggling. Another February investigation found many shelters are ineffective.
So even past efforts haven't fully panned out?
It seems that way. Analysis by Yimby Law, reported by CalMatters in February, suggested that even pro-housing laws passed previously haven't significantly boosted overall construction numbers. Plus, you still have strong local resistance in places like Marin County, though some cities like Berkeley are trying new reforms. And just today, May 1st, the Davis Enterprise reported another, quote, controversial housing bill, end quote, barely survived a key vote, while Rough and Tumble highlighted that California Democrats are, quote, fractured over housing policy, end quote. It seems the cracks are showing everywhere.
Is it purely this ideological split causing these committee upsets, or are there other factors at play?
Perplexity API suggests it might be more complex. While the ideological divide is real and significant, the specific outcomes of those late April votes could also involve unique or controversial parts of those particular bills, some targeted political maneuvering, or even procedural hiccups. Another factor could be the unusually large number of new legislators, over 30 this session. More new faces might mean more diverse opinions and less predictable voting patterns, amplifying these divisions.
So, what are the potential consequences of this internal party struggle? Does this mean housing solutions are stuck in legislative limbo?
That's the major risk, Grace. According to Perplexity API's analysis, these fractures could lead to policy gridlock. It might delay or water down the very statewide legislation needed to address the housing crisis effectively. It also reflects the tough balancing act for Democrats trying to meet the huge demand for affordable housing while also addressing concerns from constituents about local development impacts. It's a critical moment for the party on one of California's most pressing issues. They need to find a way to frame a solution everyone can live with, or in.
A complex situation with major implications for Californians needing housing. Chloe, thank you for breaking down that legislative logjam for us.
You're welcome, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. Elon Musk announced he will significantly reduce his involvement with the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, starting this month, scaling back to just 1 or 2 days a week. This transition follows months of controversy surrounding his dual roles in government cost-cutting, which included slashing federal jobs, and his leadership at Tesla. The electric vehicle company has faced challenges, with its stock dropping over 50% from December 2024 highs and first-quarter profits falling 71% this year, amid concerns about Musk's divided focus and the politicization of its vehicles. Musk, who denied recent rumors that the board sought his replacement, pledged to devote far more time to Tesla. He outlined 2 major initiatives to revitalize the company: a cheaper refresh of the best-selling Model Y SUV launching in the first half of 2025, and a robotaxi service starting paid rides in Austin, Texas by June 2025, before expanding nationwide later in the year. While one analyst called the move a, quote, big step in the right direction, Musk's future government advisory role beyond the reduced DOGE schedule remains unclear. Shifting gears to fashion, the 2025 Met Gala theme will center on Black dandyism, a style movement rooted in resistance and self-expression, tracing back to 18th-century Europe and the Atlantic diaspora. The Costume Institutia, accompanying exhibition, Superfine, Tailoring Black Style, will explore 300 years of this history across 12 sections, showcasing how enslaved and free Black individuals used clothing even imposed livery to subvert hierarchies, and how later generations adopted tailored suits and bold accessories to challenge racial stereotypes. The exhibit highlights figures like Dapper Dan and the influence of meticulous tailoring seen in icons like Janelle Monáe and Andra copyright Leon Talley, reframing fashion history around diasporic innovation. Expect the gala red carpet to feature exaggerated silhouettes and vibrant textiles reflecting this ethos. Turning to military matters, a May 1st Associated Press report reveals a 3.8% decline in sexual assault reports across the U.S. military in 2024, marking the second consecutive annual decrease with 8,195 cases reported. This follows a concerning spike in 2022. The overall drop was driven by a 13% decrease in Army reports, which offset slight increases in the Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps. However, officials caution that surveys indicate most victims still do not file reports, with tens of thousands of cases likely going unreported last year. Despite recent improvements, sexual assault remains an endemic issue, with factors like installation risks and specific gender dynamics noted in past reports. The Pentagon has yet to release its full 2024 annual report. In higher education, Limestone University, a private institution in South Carolina, announced its closure on May 1st after nearly 180 years. The university faced years of financial instability, including recurring deficits and a debt burden exceeding $30 million, primarily owed to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. A $6 million emergency fundraising campaign fell short, sealing its fate after years of dwindling enrollment and the draining of its endowment, which collapsed from $31.5 million in 2022 to $12.6 million by 2023. The closure leaves 478 faculty and staff jobless. And finally, in Florida, a U.S. district judge has temporarily blocked a new state law signed in February that makes it a state crime to knowingly enter Florida illegally, carrying a potential 9-month prison term. The judge expressed concerns that the law infringes on federal jurisdiction over immigration. This law, which also increases penalties for other crimes committed by undocumented immigrants, is part of the state's broader efforts, including agreements with ICE, to increase state law enforcement's role in immigration matters. Implementation is currently on hold due to the court order. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Sonnet 3.7, Gemini Pro 2.5 Experimental, Gemini Flash 2.0, Perplexity Sonar Pro, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.